Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. We're going to deal with all of that today. We have a guest who I've known for a while. I didn't know I knew him as long as I did, but yeah, but we'll get to that. His name is Walden Hughes, and he is, among other things, the person who is the driving force now behind a website, Yesterday USA, that plays 24 hours a day old radio shows. What I didn't know until he told me once is that he happened to listen to my show back on KUCI in Irvine when I was doing the Radio Hall of Fame between 1969 and 1976. But I only learned that relatively recently, and I didn't actually meet Walden until a few years ago when we moved down to Victorville, and we started connecting more, and I started listening more to Yesterday USA. We'll talk about some of that, but as you can tell, we're talking once again about radio and vintage radio programs, old radio programs from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like we did a few weeks ago with Carl Amari. We're going to have some other people on. Walden is helping us get some other people onto Unstoppable Mindset. Like in a few weeks, we're going to introduce and talk with Zuzu. Now, who knows who Zuzu is? I know, Walden knows, but I'll bet most of you don't. Here's a clue. Whenever a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. Zuzu was the little girl on It's a Wonderful Life, the movie, played by the star was Carolyn Grimes. And we've met Carolyn. Well, we'll get to all that. I've talked enough. Walden, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Hello, Michael. Boy, I mean, you had John Roy on years ago, and now you finally got to me. That's pretty amazing.
Well, we should have done it earlier, but that's okay. But you know what they say, the best is always saved for last.
Hey, well, considering you've been a mainstay with this show on Friday night for the last year or so, here, Yesterday USA, so you and I definitely know our ins and outs, so this should be an easy hour-plus talk.
Yes, is this the time to tell people that Walden has the record of having 42 Tootsie Rolls in his mouth at once?
That's what they say. I think we could do more, though, but yeah.
Well, we won't
Christmas,
ask. Yeah, we won't ask you to do that here.
Why not?
Nah, we want you to be able to talk. Well, I'm really glad you're here. Tell us a little about the early Walden, growing up and all that.
My mom and dad are from Nebraska, so I have a lot of Midwestern Nebraska ties. They moved out here for jobs in '65, and I was born in 1966, and I was the first baby to ever survive the Rowe-Pierre syndrome, which means I was born with a cleft palate, being extremely nearsighted, and a recessed shin. So I was the first baby, threw my mom and dad in debt by $10,000 in 17 days, and it was a struggle for my folks, in those early days, without insurance, without anything like that. People really didn't think about medical insurance and things like that in those days. That was not an issue. So I've always had an extremely loving family. Then I went through 5 retina detachments, starting when I was 7 years old up to I was 9. And I finally woke up one morning seeing white half circle. So the retina detached sometime in the middle of the night. Went to the most famous eye doctor in the world at that time, Dr. Robert Markheimer, who was the one who invented the cataract surgery and everything later. He wound up being the head of Duke Medical. That was down in Florida. And they took one last ditch effort to save my sight, but it was a 2% chance, and it didn't work out. So I went blind in November of '75, and went into school. For people who may or may not know, California is pretty aggressive in terms of education. And so when I wear hearing aids, so I part of the hard of hearing class. Newport School, Mesa, took care of the kids who were hard of hearing. and the blind children went up to Garden Grove. So when I lost my sight, went up to Garden Grove. And so that was my education. I was always a driven person. So, and I also had a family that supported me everything I ever did. They were ultimately supporting me in education and all sorts of stuff. So I wound up in the Boy Scout program, wound up being an Eagle Scout like you, wound up being visual honor in the OA. And this was all with sighted kids. I was sort of the organizer of all these sighted kids, and there was Walden. And I was that way in my entire life, which is interesting, that the most of the kids all hanging out were sighted. And even the school district, which was pretty amazing to think about it, Newport, they told my mom and dad, hey, when Walden's ready to come back to his home school district, we'll cover the bill. We'll do it. And so after my freshman year in high school, we thought, yeah, it's time to come back. And so the Newport School Mesa picked up the tab, and so did very well. Went up, applied to 7 colleges. Harvard, Yale, and Stanford turned me down. But everybody else took me.
But you went to the best school anyway.
So I'm an Aunt Ida like Michael, so I went to UCI. And I graduated in 3 years and 2 quarters with a degree in economics, a degree in politics, a minor in management. And then I went to work as a financial planner with American Express and then a stockbroker. I always wanted to go back and get my MBA, so I got my MBA at UCI. And I graduated with my MBA in accounting and finance in 1995. So that's sort of the academic part of my life.
How did your parents handle when it was first discovered that you were blind? So that would have been in 75. How did they handle that?
They handled it really well. I think my dad was wonderful. My dad was the one that took me and my brother to all the doctor appointments. It was such a traumatic thing for my mom. So my dad took that responsibility. My mom just cleaned the house. But my dad always thought if I were going to make it through life, it was going to be between my ears. It was going to be my brain. Yeah. And I was gifted academically in terms of my analytical abilities are really off the chart. They tested me like in 160. And that means I could take a very complicated scenario, break it down, and give you a quick answer how to solve it within seconds. And that paid off. So no, I think, and they had complete, and so they put in the time.
What kind of work did your dad do?
My dad wound up being a real estate agent.
Okay.
And so that gave him flexibility time. Yeah. My mom wound up working for the Irvine company, which is the big agriculture at that time, now apartments and commercial real estate here in Orange County. And so with their support and with their emphasis on education, and so they helped me a great deal. They helped my brother a great deal. So I think in my case, having 2 really actively involved parents paid off, in terms of they knew where to support me and they knew when to give me my head, because I would. A classic example of this, after I graduated from college at UCI, I was looking for work. And my mom saying, oh, go to rehab, talk to them. They're supposed to help you out. Give it. And I really wasn't interested. So I sat down and met with them. And I had several interviews, and they said, we're not going to fund you. Because either A, you're going to be so successful on your own, you pay for your own stuff, or B, you'll completely fail. So and that's what they flat out told me at rehab. So and I had more luck in the private sector finding work than I did ever in the public sector, which was interesting.
I know that when I was in high school, and it's still around today, of course, they had a program called SSI through the Department of Social Security, and then there was also another program, Aid to the Potentially Self-Supporting Blind, and we applied for those. And when I went to UC Irvine, I had met, actually, in 1964, a gentleman while I was up getting my guide dog. He was getting a guide dog. His name was Howard Mackey. And when I went to college, my parents also explored me getting some services and assistance from the Department of Rehabilitation, and I was accepted. And then Howard Mackey ended up becoming my counselor. And the neat thing about it was he was extremely supportive and really helped in finding transcribers to put physics books in Braille, paid for whatever the state did it at the time, readers and other things like that I needed, provided equipment. It was really cool. He was extremely supportive, which I was very grateful for. But yeah, I can understand sometimes the rehabilitation world can be a little bit wonky. Of course, you went into it some 18 to 20 years later than I, in a sense, started it, because I started in 68, 69.
Yeah.
And I think over time, just the state got cheaper, everything got cheaper. And of course, now it's really a lot different than it used to be. And it's a lot more challenging to get services from a lot of the agencies. And of course, in our current administration, a lot of things are being cut and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. And that's pretty scary.
That's interesting, because when I went to UCI, the school picked it up. The school picked up my transcribing, they picked up my readers and all that. So it's interesting how.
But did they let you hire your own readers and so on, or did they do that?
They just put out the word, and people came up and they paid them. So they were just looking for people on the campus to do all the work. And
yeah,
in fact, I had one gal who read pretty much all my years. She was waiting to get a job in the museum, and the job she wanted, you basically had to die to get it open. And so for a full-time employment with the read, because I was taking 20 units a quarter.
Yeah.
So I was cranking it out. And in those days, everybody, you were lucky I was lucky to get the material a week or two before midterm.
Yeah.
So I would speed up the tape and do a couple of all-nighters just to get through. Because I really didn't want to delay my examinations. I wanted to get it through. But also I guess I was going full time just throughout the quarter system and through the summer, because I wanted to get it done. So that's how I did it.
I didn't do summer school, but I did 16 to 20 units a quarter as well, and kept readers pretty busy, and was never questioned, even though we had some pretty hefty reader bills. But it worked, and I hired my own readers. We put out the word, but I hired my own readers, and I think that's really important. If a school pays for the readers but lets you hire the readers, that's good, because I think that people need to learn how to hire and fire, and how to learn what's necessary and how to get the things that they need. And if the agency or the school does it all and they don't learn how to do it, that's a problem.
It's fascinating, just a sidebar issue. Computers really became a big part. And with my hearing loss, TSI was really...
Yeah, Telesensory Systems Incorporated, right.
And they were upscale everybody. It was, $2,500 a pop. And for my hearing, it was the best. For the card, the actual card that fits into the slot that would read on the screen.
Okay, right.
And eventually they went with software, which made it a lot cheaper.
Yes.
And so my folks paid for that in the early days, the mid-'80s, the computers and the software. And a lot of that were trial and error in terms of there really was not any customer support from the computer companies that are making special products like that. You were pretty much left on your own to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so the time I went to graduate in 1990, we figured in the business world, financial planning, I'm going to need a whole complete setup at work, and it's going to cost me $20,000.
Yeah.
And of course, when rehab said, we ain't budgeting it, we ain't going to finance it. What happened was, and this has helped with the scouting program, I knew the vice president of the local bank. And in those days, if it was still a small bank, he just went and just gave me a personal loan. And I didn't have to get any code centers or anything. No, we're going to be the first one to finance you getting your own computer set up. And so they financed it for me, and then also Boyle kicked in for $7,500. But that's how I was able to swing my first really complicated $20,000 units in 1990.
Yeah. The Braille Institute had a program. I don't know whether they still do or not. They had a program where they would pay for. I don't know whether the top was $7,500. I know they paid for half the cost of technology, but that may have been the upper limit. Mm-hmm. I know I used the program to get in when we moved to New Jersey. I was able to get one of the, at that time, $15,000 Kurzweil reading machines. That was in 1996, and Braille Institute paid for half of that, so it was pretty cool. But you mentioned TSI, which is Telesensory Systems, Inc., for those who wouldn't know that. Telesensory was a very innovative company that developed a lot of technologies that blind and low vision people use. For example, they developed something called the Opticon, which was a box that had a place where you could put a finger, and then there was attached to it a camera that you could run over a printed page, and it would display in the box a vibrating image of each character as the camera scanned across the page. It wasn't a really fast reading program. I think there were a few people who could read up to 80 words a minute, but it was still originally one of the first ways that blind people had access to print. And
I was the first guinea pig for the program because I just lost my sight in '75, and they wanted me to be on there. I was really the first one that the school supplied the Opticon and had special training because I knew what sight looked like. For everybody, what Mike's describing, it was to be the electronic waves, but it'd be in regular print letters, not Braille letters.
Right,
and
what
so
you felt were actually images of the print letters.
Right. And the thing that got me about it, my hand tingled after a while.
Yeah. Mine too.
It didn't last forever, so.
It wasn't something that you could use for incredibly long periods of time. Again, I think a few people could, but basically print letters are made to be seen, not felt. And so that also limited the speed. Of course, technology is a whole lot different today, and the Opticon has faded away. And as Walden said, the card that used to plug into computer slots that would verbalize whatever came across the screen has now given way to software and a whole lot more that makes it a lot more usable. But still, there's a lot of advances to be made. But yeah, we both, well, and another thing that TSI did was they made probably the first real talking calculator, the View Plus. Remember that?
Yep. And there was good sound quality.
It was good sound quality. It was really $395, and it was really a 4-function calculator. It wasn't scientific or anything like that. But it still was the first calculator that gave us an opportunity to have something that would, at least at a simple level, compete with what sighted people did. And yes, you could plug in your phone so sighted people, if you were taking a test, couldn't hear what the calculator was saying. But at that time, calculators weren't really allowed in the classroom anyway. So
my downside was, the time I bought the equipment was during the DOS mode. And just like that, Windows came over, and that pretty much made a lot of my equipment obsolete fairly quickly. And that was because I love my Braille display. That was terrific. For when you learn the computers, if you're blind, you didn't really get a feel what the screen looked like, everybody. And with the Braille display, which mine was half the screen underneath my keyboard, I could get a visual feel how things laid out on the computer, and it was easier for me to communicate with somebody that I knew what they were talking about.
Yeah. And of course, it's gotten so much better over time. But yeah, I remember good old MS-DOS. I still love to play some of the old MS-DOS games like Adventure and all that, and Zork and some of those fun games.
Well,
but
my understanding, DOS is still there. It's just Windows
it is.
It's a little on top of it, basically.
If you open a command prompt in Windows, that actually takes you to DOS. So DOS is still there. It is attached to the whole system. And sometimes you can go in and enter commands through DOS to get things done a little bit easier than you might be able to with the normal graphic user interface.
Right.
Well, so you got your master's degree in 1995, and so you then continued to work in the financial world, or what?
Did it for 10 years, but 5 years earlier, well, maybe I should back it up this way. After I lost my sight in 1976, I really gravitated to the radio. Mm-hmm. And my generation fell in love with talk radio. Mm-hmm. So and we were really blessed here in the LA market with really terrific hosts at KABC. And it wasn't all the same thing over and over and beating the drum. And so listening to Ray Bream, Michael Jackson, Ira Fitzgerald, Carol Hemingway, that was a great opportunity for somebody who was 10 years old to really enjoy.
And they were all different shows. And
yes.
I remember once we were listening to, I think it was Michael Jackson. It was on Sunday night, and we heard this guy talking about submarines, and it just attracted Karen's and my attention. And it turns out what it was Tom Clancy talking about Hunt for Red October.
Wow.
And that's where we first heard about it, and then went and found the book.
But so I grew up in the talk radio, and then I fell in love with country music at the time on KLAC. Mm-hmm. And then
Jim Healy in sports.
Yep. And then we were blessed in the LA market to have a lot of old time radio played. Mm-hmm. And it was hosts, like Mike was here at KUCI, John Roy, eventually over KPCC, Bob Wine. And so my relatives said, you should listen to this marathon, KPFK, which was an all-day marathon, and I fell in love with that.
Jay Lacey.
And then one night, after I lost my sight, I tuned in. Ray Bream took the night off, and Bill Balance had Frank Brzee sit in. And the first thing they played was Jack Armstrong. And this is where Jack and Billy get caught up in a snowstorm, and they're going down the hill. And Brett Morrison came in during the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock hours to talk about The Shadow. And so my dad took me to, I'm trying to think of the name of the record store. They gave away licorice at the record store.
Tower Records?
Yeah, not Tower Records.
Not Tower.
Anyway, so we bought 2 8-track tapes in 1976, The Shadow and Superman, and that started my long life of collecting. And so here we up to 1990, after collecting for 15 years, going to Spurvac conventions and meetings. I knew Ray Bream was going to have Kitty Cowan at the guest. Kitty Cowan was a big band singer of the 40s, who later in the 50s had Little Things Mean a Lot. And I figured nobody was going to ask her about her days on the Danny Kaye radio show. And so I called in. They realized I had the stuff. I had the radio shows. They took me off the air. And Kitty's husband, Bud Granoff, called me the next day. And we struck up a friendship. And so they were really connected in Hollywood. And so they opened so many doors for me, Mike. Kitty's best friend was Nancy Sinatra Sr. Bud was one of the most powerful agents in town. There was a game show host named who could come up with the TV ideas but did not know how to run an organization. So that was Chuck Barris.
Mm.
And
The Gong Show.
yeah. And so they wound up giving me and hiring me to find the old TV shows, the music, all that stuff around the country. And so I started to do that for the Sinatra family and everybody else. So while I was doing the financial planning, my internet consulting thing really took off. So that wound up being more fun than trying to sell disability insurance.
Yeah.
So I wound up doing that until the internet took over. So that was so my whole life was really reshape through Kitty Cowan and Bud Granoff through that. So I really connected in the Hollywood industry from that point on, starting in 1990. So that really opened up, that really sort of reshaped my entire life just because of that.
And you have done over the years, one of the other things that you started to do was to interview a lot of these people, a lot of the radio stars, the radio actors.
And music and TV.
Music and
I've done
TV
like
and so on.
2,000 of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when Bill Bragg asked me to interview Kitty Cowan, I did that in 2000. And Bill said, well, could you do more? And so one of Kitty's friends was Tess Russell. Tess was Gene Autry's Girl Friday. She ran KMPC for him. And I think everybody in the music industry owed her a favor. I mean, I had Joe Stafford to Pat Boone to everybody you could think of from that big band, the 30s, 40s, and 60s on the show.
Let's go back. Tell us about Bill Bragg.
Bill Bragg was an interesting character all by himself, born in 1946. He was a TV cameraman for CBS in Dallas. He was also a local music disc jockey. Nothing big. His big claim to fame was working for Channel 2. And then he was at a press conference with LBJ. And LBJ got done speaking, and the camera crew decided that they were going to pack up and go to lunch. And Bill thought it'd be fun to mark what what microphone the president used for his address. And the guys were in a rush. Said, throw it in the box, let's go have lunch. So Bill lost track, and that bothered him. So he started the largest communication museum in 1979. And he collected and was donated, and so he had the biggest museum. He had a film exchanger. So in those early days of cable TV, we had a lot of TV stations specializing in programming. And there were channels, I think this was called a nostalgic channel, wanted to run old TV shows and films. They had the film, but they didn't have the equipment. And they got a hold of Bill and said, okay, I'll do it for you, but what are you going to give me in exchange? Bill was a wheeling dealer.
Yeah.
And so they said, we'll give you your own satellite channel. And I was talking to Bill's friend later, John Redmond. In those days, in the 1983 when Bill got it, the value of those satellite channels was $1 million a year. And he got it for free. And Bill was trying to figure out what in the world I'm going to do with this. And that's when he decided to start playing with old-time radio. Because really nobody was playing that on a national basis. You had different people playing it on a local basis, but not really on a national basis. So Bill was sort of the first one to play old-time radio. I became aware of him because of Spurvac, so I was trying to get the service on my cable TV company. It was unsuccessful.
So what he did is he broadcast through the satellite channel, and then different television stations or companies could, if they chose to, pick up the feed And broadcast it. Did they broadcast it on a TV channel or on radio?
Yes,
Or?
most of them
On TV.
broadcasted on the public access channel.
Okay.
So remember in those days, a lot of public would have these bulletin boards with the local news of
Right.
their community, and a lot of them would play Bill's channel.
They played Bill's channel because what they were doing was showing everything on the screen, which didn't help us, but
Right.
they would show things on the screen and they would play music or something in the background. So Bill's programs were a natural thing to play.
Yeah, and so Bill wound up on the then he wound up being the audio subcurator for WGN, which was a nice break. And so, and then Bill got it to be played in 2,000 nursing homes and hospitals, and then local AM/FM stations would pick us up. They were looking for overnight programming, so local throughout the country would pick it up. And so, Bill was a go-getter. He was a great engineer and knew how to build things on the cheap. He was not a businessman. You know, he couldn't take it to the next level. But at least he was able to come up with a way to run a station 24 hours a day. It was all the tapes were sent down to Tennessee to be uploaded to play into the system. Eventually, he built a studio and everything in Dallas. And
So, of course, what Walden is saying is that everything was on tape, whether it
Right.
was cassette or reel to reel. And they would play the tapes through a tape machine, a player or recorder, and put it out on the satellite channels, which was how they had to do it. And that's how we did it at KUCI. We had tape, and I would record on Sunday nights all the shows that we were going to play on a given night on a reel of tape. We would take it in and we would play it.
And so that's how it was done in the 80s. And eventually, Bill built a studio and then started to do a live show once a week. Eventually, they grew up to 4 days a week. And so here is about 1999 or so. And they were playing music from Kitty Callan, did not know who she was. I would quickly just give me a couple background from and hang up. They had no idea who I was. I didn't talk about what I was doing, things like that. I was just supplying information. And eventually, after 2 years, they asked me to bring Kitty on the show, which I did. And then I started to book guests on a regular basis for them. And then eventually, the guy who I enjoyed old-time radio shows listening to, Frank Brzee, in 1976, Bill decided that I should be his producer. And so I wound up producing the Friday Night Live show with Frank Brzee. And eventually we got it up and running in 2002. So Frank and I did it together for 16 years. And so Bill built a studio in Texas, mailed it all to my house. My dad didn't have any engineering ability. So Bill got on the phone and built me a whole studio in 6 hours. And I was up and running with my own studio here in my bedroom in 2002. And so I've been in my bedroom ever since, Michael. You know,
there you go. Well, and to tell people about Frank Brzee, Frank, probably the biggest claim to fame is that he had a program called The Golden Days of Radio, and it was mainly something that was aired in the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service on the radio, where he would every show play excerpts of different radio programs and so on. And one of the neat things that's fascinating for Frank was that because he was doing so much with Armed Forces and doing that, he had access to all of the libraries around the world that the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service had. So he could go in and oftentimes get shows and get things that no one else really had because they were only available in, at least initially, in these military libraries. But he would put them on the air and did a great job with it for many, many years.
Yeah, Frank was an interesting character. A pure entrepreneur. He invented a game called Pass Out, which was a drinking game, a board game. And for 20 years, he spent 6 months in Europe, 6 months in the United States. And he was making so much money in Europe, he would rent out castles and lived in them. And he would spend months at a time in Germany, which was the main headquarters of Encore,
Right.
and just sit there in the archives and make copies of things he wanted to play on his show.
Yeah.
And so that's how he built that. And then he started collecting transcriptions when he was 10. He was a radio actor, and so he had one of the largest collection. And his house, his family house, was in Hancock Park, which was it was Beverly Hills before Beverly Hills, basically.
What did he play in radio when he was an actor?
He was the backup Little Beaver when Tommy
Red
Cook
Ryder. Yeah.
when Tommy Cook had another project, it was Frank Brazil was his substitute, and so that was his sort of claim to fame. He did sort of bit parts on other shows, but that's what he did as a kid. Eventually, I think Frank came from a very wealthy family. He wound up owning his first radio station when he was 19 years old on Catalina Island in 1949. And then he wound up being a record producer. He worked with Walter Winchell, created albums about Al Jolson, and worked on Eddie Cantor and Jimmy Durante. And anyway, Frank had a career with creating board games, doing radio, and having an advertising company. Frank was responsible for giving all the game shows their prizes for TV. And the way he would do it, he would call a company. He said, "You want your product to be on this such and such show?" They said, "Yes." "Okay, give us the product and give me $150." And so Frank would keep the cash, and he would give the prizes to the TV shows.
Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. I remember that on so many shows.
So Frank was a wheeler and dealer, and he loved radio. That was his passion project. He probably made less money doing that, but he just loved doing it. And he was just his second house, the family house, was 8,400 square feet, and so it was pretty much a storage unit for Frank's hobbies.
Right.
And he had 30,000 transcriptions in one time, but when he was in Europe, he had a couple of floods, so he lost about 10 to 20,000 of them. Okay, folks did not know how to keep them dry, but he had his professional studio built, and so I would book guests. I would arrange for Art Linkletter to come over and other people, Catherine Crosby to come over, and Frank would do the interviews. And so that was a big job for me to keep the Friday night show going and get Frank his guests for his shows. So I was a busy guy.
And he was a really good interviewer.
Yeah.
I remember especially he did an interview that that you played on Yesterday USA, and I was listening to it with Mel Blanc, which was just very fascinating. But he was a great interviewer. I think it was 1969 that he started the golden days of radio.
Starting 49, actually.
Or 49, not 69.
Yeah, 49. That was strictly local on Catalina and KIGL, which was a station I think heard out in the valley, pretty much.
Yeah, we could pick it up.
And then he started with Armed Forces around 65.
That's what I was thinking of. I thought it was 69, but...
He was heard on... In those days, there were... Armed Forces Europe picked them up, and also there was the International Armed Forces heard around the world.
Far Eastern Network, right.
Yeah. And so by 67, he was pretty much on 400 stations throughout the whole world. And that's probably how you guys picked them up, through that capability.
Well, that's where I first heard of him. And the only thing for me was I like to hear whole shows, and he played excerpts so much. That was a little frustrating, but he was such a neat guy.
Yeah.
You couldn't help but love all the history that he brought to it.
And then he would produce live Christmas shows with the radio. Yeah. He would interview the guests. So he had access to people that nobody generally had. He worked for Bob Hope.
Right.
So he was able to get to Jack Benny and Bing Crosby and get people like that Groucho Marx. So he had connections that were beyond the average old time radio buff. He was truly a great guy to help us the hobby out, and he loved radio very much.
Well, going back to Bill Bragg a little bit, so he had the satellite channel, and then of course we got the internet, which opened so many things for Frank, or for Frank, for everyone, but for Bill, and he started the program yesterdayusa.net on the radio through the internet, which meant that
he was the first one in 1996.
Right.
There's a great story about that. There was a company called broadcast.com. I bet you remember that company, Mike. Anyway, it was founded by a guy who loved college basketball. And he was a big Hoosier fan. And he was living in Texas. And so he would generally call long distance to his buddy, and they would put up the radio. He could listen to the basketball games. And eventually he decided, well, maybe I could come up and stream it on my computer. And all his equipment was breaking down. Eventually he came up with the idea of, well, if I had a satellite dish, I could pick up the feed and stream it on the computer. That way people can hear it.
Right.
And he hired Bill to do that. And he offered Bill a full-time job installing satellites and working. Bill turned him down. And the guy wound up being Mark Cuban.
Yeah.
And Mark Cuban gave every of his employee, when he sold broadcast.com to Yahoo, $1 million bonus. So Bill missed out on that. But in exchange, Mark Cuban gave him broadcast.com YUSA channel for free. So Bill never had to pay in the early days until about 2002. So when Yahoo decided to get out of the streaming business for a while, then that's when we had to find, and we found Live 365 eventually. And we were paying pretty good. We were paying a really good rate with Live 365. Bill was used to paying free, and we were paying, I think, under $100. And I knew guys later, a couple years, we were paying over $500 a month. And we were, but Bill was such a wheeling dealer, we were able to get those things for at really dirt cheap
for less
price.
money. Yeah. Now I remember being in New Jersey, and I started hearing ads for an internet radio station. This was in the very late 90s, maybe even into 2000. WABY. It was a station that played a lot of old songs from the 50s and 60s and so on. And it was if you tuned onto it, you could listen, and after 4 or 5 hours, things would start to repeat. And then eventually it disappeared. But I started looking around, and I don't even remember how I found it. But one day I heard about this radio station, www.yesterdayusa.net, right?
Yep, .net.com. Yep.
And I said, I think I actually heard an ad for it on WABY when it was still around. Anyway, I went to it, and they were playing old radio shows. And they had a number of people who would come on and play shows. Everyone had an hour and a half show. And every 2 weeks, you would have to send in a new show. But they played old radio shows 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Except they also had some live talk shows. And I remember listening one day and heard Bill Bragg talking about the fact that he was going to have his standard Friday night show with Walden Hughes. It would start at 9 o'clock. I had no idea who Walden was at the time. And the problem is 9 o'clock was in Pacific time, and it was, I think, midnight in New Jersey time, as I recall the way it went. Anyway, it was way too late for me to be up. And so I never did hear Walden on Yesterday USA, or I may have actually just stayed up to listen to one and fell asleep. But the show, the whole innovative process of playing radio all the time on the internet was intriguing and just opened so many opportunities, I think. And of course, the internet brought all that around. And now There are any number of stations that stream all the time. And Bill Bragg passed away, in 2016?
2018.
18.
2019. Yeah.
And Walden now is the person who directs, operates, and is the manager of Yesterday USA. And so go ahead.
It's fascinating. In the height of the station, there were 15,000 internet radio stations out there.
Mm-hmm.
In 2000, they did a survey. Yesterday USA was number 3 in the world behind the BBC and CNN, which I thought was a pretty nice number to be, considering we had no budget to promote.
Right.
And the last time I saw the numbers, it's been a couple of years, we were number 44 in the world, which is, I still think of 15,000 radio stations, not bad.
No, not at all.
Really not bad.
But now there is more talk than there used to be, because Walden and the Gassmans, who we had on years ago on this podcast, but have interviewed a lot of people and continue to interview people. And of course, so many people are passing on that we're trying to talk to people as much as we can, as they can, and all of us now, because I've started to become a little bit involved in Yesterday USA. And as Walden said on Friday night at 7:30 Pacific time, see, it's earlier, we do a talk show. Bob Lyons, who did a lot of radio out here and for 50 years had a program called Don't Touch That Dial. And John and Larry and Walden and I get on the air and we talk about, any number of different things. We've talked about Braille. We've talked about sometimes everything but radio, but we talk about a lot of different things, which is a lot of fun.
And I think it probably is, in the old days, it was pretty much nostalgic entertainment and Bill telling some stories and things like that. But with me, I always had a focus on interviews, but it's so much more fun to do radio with a co-host. And that's when Patricia and I connected back in 2007. I knew it was in 2005. She's my co-host. And Patricia didn't grow up with old-time radio. She became a fan after she found Yesterday USA in 2000. But she's a very articulate person. And so through the shows, what she and I did on Saturday night, the audience grabbed it and we just talk about everything. Mm-hmm. And I just generate calls. I mean, when she and I were doing 8 hours a night, we would average about 18 calls a night, which was pretty amazing. But we would cover the gamut. And I think a really good talk show host has to know a little bit about a lot of things.
Yes.
You gotta be flexible. And Patricia and I complement each other that way, that we're able to cover history and politics and music and just everything. And so when I do a show with her, it's you never know what direction we go with. Where when I'm with John and Larry, it's more radio centric.
Yeah.
So it depends on what night of the week people tune in is what you're going to get.
And Walden has Patricia on now Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. But we know why she's really on there, because she likes hearing Perry Como's song Patricia that starts out every show. Walden plays that. He's in love with Patricia. One of these days, there's still the possibility. But anyway, we love it when he has Patricia on, and it's every week. So it is really cool, and they talk about everything under the sun, which is so fascinating. Tell us about Johnny and Helen Holmes.
Well, it's an interesting story. I say the second biggest old-time radio station in the country after Yesterday USA. It's about half the size in terms of the audience base is Radio Once More. And you can find them at radiooncemore.com. And they do a good job. Mm-hmm. Neil Ellis, with probably Yesterday USA, branched off on his own internet radio station. And he would go to the East Coast to these nostalgic conventions, and he connected with Johnny and Helen Holmes. And Johnny and Helen are people who love to attend nostalgic conventions and get autographs and things. And they became really friends. So Neil convinced them, why don't you come on radio once more? And so after a while, they do the presentation in a coffee shop. Neil convinced them to take it to the air, and they started to have their own show.
Mm-hmm.
And I was aware of them, and I produced the Spurvac convention in 2017 in Las Vegas. So Johnny and Helen came to the convention, and Johnny wanted to say hi to me. And I said, I know who you are. I think he was floored by that I knew who he was. But I invited Johnny and Helen to come on with Patricia and I one night to talk about their coffee shop presentation and their show on radio once more. And we just bonded very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's easy to bond with Johnny.
They really are. They're really fabulous people. He's really a generous guy. And so over the last 6-7 years, we have developed a great friendship on the air and almost have created a whole subculture by itself playing trivia with them. Every time they come on.
They do a lot of trivia stuff, and Johnny produces it very well. He
really does a great job, and he'll put sound bites and clips and music, and it's gotten to be such a major production with Johnny and Helen, and people look forward to it. I sometimes count the interaction, people hanging out in the chat room, on the phone, email, about 18 to 20 people will get and answer questions, which is amazing that many people will be interested in trivia like that. But
and Johnny also collects, well, I guess, and Helen collect a lot of old television shows as well.
Yep.
So we won't hold it against him too much, but he does television, and well, I like old TV shows too.
You bet.
Well, so you obviously are doing a lot of different things. You mentioned Spurvac. Oop, they're after you.
We'll wait till the phone dies.
You mentioned, well, I'll just ask this while that's going on. You mentioned Spurvac. Tell us a little bit about what Spurvac is and what they've been doing and what they bring to radio.
Spurvac started in 1974. It's the largest old-time radio group in the country, called the Society to Preserve and Encourage Radio, Drama, Variety, and Comedy. John and Lori Gassman were two of the main driving force behind the club. It reached up to a membership of 1,800 people, and they've honored over 500 people who worked in the golden days of radio and to speak at their meetings, come to the special conventions. And so I attended some dinners at the Brown Derby, which was a great thrill. I started attending their conventions, and it was just, it was wonderful. So I really got to meet a lot of the old time radio personalities and become friends with Janet Waldo and June Foray and people like that. And so I eventually got on the board. I eventually became, once John Lori somewhat retired, I wound up being the activity person to book guests and started to produce the conventions, and so that became a major part of my life, just producing those things for Spurvac and in other places. And I first started to do that for Reps, which is the old time radio group in Seattle, in 2007. So they were actually the first convention I produced.
And Reps is Radio Enthusiasts of Puget Sound.
Right. repsonline.org. And so I was producing their convention, I was helping Spurvac, and I also was helping the Friends of Old Time Radio back in New Jersey. And so, and it probably helped, my contact list is 300 pages long. So, and I would also contact celebrities via the mail. And my batting average was 20%, which I thought was pretty good. I got Margaret Truman. She called me and said, Walden, I got your letter, and I forgot that I did the show with Jimmy Stewart. I'll be happy to come on and talk about my memory. She talked about Fred Allen on The Big Show, and how Mike Wallace had a temper, and she was the co-host with him on weekdays, which was the weekday version of Monitor was weekend, and weekdays
on NBC.
NBC. And so she was just fabulous, So, and I would get people like that 20% batting average, which was incredible. So that's how a substitute my guess was. So I was sort of the go-to guy, finding celebrities and booking them, and so that helped. Yes, the USA helped the different conventions, and so you're booking the panels, and then you're coming up with ideas for radio recreations. And so I produced 37 of them, ranging from 1 day to 4 days. And I get counted over the last 18 years. I produced 226 audio theater plays, which is a lot. I at least have an idea how those things work.
So right now, speaking of recreations, and we're both involved in Radio Enthusiasts of Puget Sound, and for the last couple of years, I've participated in this. Walden has done radio recreations and twice a year up in the Washington State area, where we bring in both some amateurs and some professionals like Carolyn Grimes, Zuzu, and so many others who come in, and we actually recreate old radio shows, both before a live audience, and we broadcast them on Yesterday USA.
And other people like Margaret O'Brien, who won an Oscar. Gigi Perot coming this year. Phil Proctor, David Osmond from Fireside Theater. Chuck Dougherty from Sergeant Preston. John Provo from Timmy from Lassie. Bill Johnson, who does a one-man show on Bob Hope. Bill Ratner from G.I. Joe. Bill Owen, who Mike have had. He is the author of the Big Broadcast. Ivan Curry, who is Bobby Benson. Tommy Cook from The Life of Riley. Gigi Perot, a movie actress of the 50s. As you mentioned, Carolyn Grimes, Beverly Washburn, and others. And it's just, the radio folks are really down-to-earth, really nice people. And you get to break bread with them, talk to them, and reminisce about what was it like doing that radio show or this movie or that TV show. And then they still got it, and they can perform on stage.
And they love to talk about it, and they love to interact with people who treat them as people. And so, yeah, it is a lot of fun to be able to do it. In fact, I was on Carolyn Grimes' podcast, which will be coming out at some point in the next little while. And Carolyn is going to be on Unstoppable Mindset. So keep an eye out for that. Bill Owens' program is coming out soon. Bill and I did a conversation for Unstoppable Mindset. And we're going to be doing, Bill Johnson will be coming on, and other people will be coming on. Walden has been very helpful at finding some of these folks who are willing to come on and talk about what they did and to help us celebrate this medium that is just as much a part of history as anything in America and is just as worth listening to as it ever was. There is more to life than television, no matter what they think.
And also we do a Christmas thing, too. And hopefully Mike, if his speaking engagement allow him, will be with us up at Christmas. And
I'm planning on it.
We're going to do It's a Wonderful Life. Keith Scott coming over from Australia, he's the Rich Little of Australia. And we'll do It's a Wonderful Life. We'll do The Christmas Carol, Miracle on 34th Street, Phil McGee and Molly, Jack Benny. We'll have a great time.
These are all going to be recreations using the original scripts from the shows, and that's what makes them fun. And for those of us who don't read print, we do have our scripts in Braille.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of fun. Well, Walden, this has been absolutely wonderful. We're going to have to do it some more. Maybe we need to get you, John, and Larry all together on.
I think you're right.
That might be kind of fun. But I
don't think we need a host if you did that.
No, we just just go on. But this has been really fun. I really enjoy it. If people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Oh, I think they can call my studio number at 714-545-2071. I'm in California. or they can email me at waldenhughes@yesterdayyusa.com, WALDENHUGHES YESTERDAYUSA.com. I'm the president of Radio Enthusiasts of Puget Sound. That's repsonline.org, or on the board of SPERVAC, which is SPERDVAC.com. So a lot of ways you can chase me down.
When will the showcase actually occur up in Bellevue in Washington?
That will be September 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. And then Christmas one will be Friday, December 5, and Saturday, December the 6th. And then we're also going back at SPERVAC, and I bet we'll see you there. We're going to go back to the Cherry Blossom Festival next April, the last April 23rd to 26th. And we'll
are we set up to do that now?
Yep, looks like that's going to happen. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So, just got on the phone with Nicholas here a few days ago, so everything's going to go for that. So that'll be good.
Yeah, we will do that. That's cool. Well, thank you for being here, and I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you had fun. This is a little different than a lot of the episodes that we've done, but it's, I think, important and enlightening to hear about this medium and to meet people from it. So thank you for listening wherever you are. We hope that you'll give us a 5-star review of Unstoppable Mindset. Wherever you're listening or watching, please do that. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at Michael, Michaelhi, at accessibe.com. And you can also go to our podcast page. If you don't find podcasts any other way, michaelhingson.com/podcast. That's michaelhingson.com/podcast, singular. So thanks again for being here and for listening to the show. And Walden, once again, I want to thank you for being here. This has been great.
Thanks, Michael.